All right. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got another special episode where I'm sitting down with one of my local friends who is also into powerlifting, Matt Jones, and we're just gonna have a conversation, and talk about past experiences, whether it be high school and moving out of high school into college and careers, and just kind of BS for a little bit about powerlifting and share experiences. So. Matt, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Matt Jones. I grew up Garrett County, Maryland, just like Tristan. We attended the same high school, Southern Garrett High School. Um, yeah, born and raised around here. Got into powerlifting late in high school. It was junior year when I got into things. Continued doing the sport to the present day. I attended Garrett College after high school and then moved on to Frostburg State University, same place where Tristan went to college. Just finished up there. Took me pretty long time. I started out pursuing education, physical education, and then I switched paths and went for a natural resource wildlife concentration. Turned out really good. That's what I do for a living and still continue to power lift. I'm excited to be able to finally devote much more of my time to it since pesky school isn't in the way anymore. But yeah, that's basically where I'm at.
Awesome. And that kind of, I actually didn't know. Did I know that you had gone into physical education to start? I don't think I did. What made
Yeah,
you
you
switch
probably,
from that?
so it was kind of interesting. So I started out doing it, and it was kind of weird how my decision was made. So my first year at Garrett College, I had Dr. Taylor for a lot of classes, and we had to do a partner teacher placement. And I spent, I think, 2 weeks at Southern and 2 weeks at Northern. So this is just our cross county high schools. And I was teaching with Mrs. Stow at Northern, and then with Coach Skipper at Southern. And it was a fantastic experience. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed working with the children, and everything was great. Um, but through some long conversations with my fiance, she kind of encouraged me to pursue my passion, which is outdoors, wildlife conservation, and ecology. And she made a point that, this is a big decision. It's something you're going to do forever. So you should go that route. So I started studying wildlife and natural resources at Garrett College and then Frostburg, finished up. I'm working in the field and everything's great. So I'm happy with my decision. But where it gets kind of funny is now I still want to teach. I do just love working with kids. I just think now I would like to teach science. And try to impart wisdom in a subject that I feel very passionately about. And so there wasn't, I guess the switch wasn't really made due to dislike of anything. It was more just trying to get into something I'm more passionate about in terms of just something I can do long term and also not kill my enjoyment for my hobbies, which are more related to lifting weights and being in the gym. So it's kind of nice to keep them separated.
Yeah, I'm right there in that camp with you. And it's funny, this kind of led in that direction right off the bat. But, I've had students ask, hey, why didn't you become a gym teacher? Or why don't you try and teach weightlifting at school? And one of my main things that I really don't want to do is mix work and hobby, something I'm so passionate about,
Mhm.
because people get burnt out that way, I feel like. And I think that's exactly what you were just saying there, that you were trying to avoid a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where I don't want to blur the lines between what is professional and what is enjoyment. Um, Mainly because, maybe I'm not intrinsic enough to be able to separate the two myself. So it's just better that I don't do what I'm working in as my predominant hobby, which it's not to say I don't enjoy going bird watching and fishing and hunting. That's what got me into wildlife. But what I do for a profession in that field is just vastly different. And then I enjoy powerlifting. So yeah, the whole thing with, like you said, not wanting to become a gym teacher, it's not from lack of passion for physical fitness or wanting future generations to be physically fit. It's just that I like the distinction for me personally.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can kind of second that myself. And the cool thing, if you decide to go the teaching route, which it sounds like you're going with sciences, you know,
Mm.
uh, getting a second subject under your belt in teaching actually isn't all that hard. You know, you just take a praxis in it, and then if the spot opens up to teach that subject, then you can. So, you know,
Mm.
that's something you can always keep in your back pocket. You could be a gym teacher for a period
Mm.
while teaching science or something like that. So, um, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's super cool, and I think the future is bright. You know, not only for myself, but you also, just like you said, if you get into teaching or whatever your uh, individual career field is, there's lots of options, and keep working at it for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. And that kind of like leads us down this path because, you know, I would venture to say I was definitely influenced by our gym teachers in high school. You know, Coach Greg, Coach Skipper, as you had mentioned, the football coaches who kind of pushed me into the weight room, including my dad. Um,
Mhm.
how did you get your start into just lifting weights in general and then powerlifting and competing?
Yeah, so the initial interest in weightlifting for me was probably spurred by my uncle, who was always really into lifting weights, but he was into bodybuilding specifically. And I always kind of idolized him and thought he was, really cool because he was so muscular and strong. So that kind of spurred the interest, but then it was really driven home, like you said, by our high school gym teacher, specifically Coach Greg and Coach Skipper, and then the football coaches, because they were encouraging us starting in eighth grade to start coming to the high school and lifting weights in the weight room. And that was great for me because essentially that was the keys to the kingdom to actually get access to actual weightlifting equipment, because I had been doing what I could do at home, but that was working with, literally um, the beginnings of weightlifting for me was seventh grade, and I was using an easy curl bar with, I might have had 30 pounds of weight for each side and two 15-pound dumbbells. It was the only size I had. So for me to get into the high school weight room and be around you guys, that was just awesome. So I definitely took advantage of that. So that was a heavy influence. And then to get into powerlifting specifically, the biggest influence to spur that interest probably was you. And not just because I'm on this channel, but you got into powerlifting. The people I like to be around in the weight room for after school weightlifting typically was, yourself, Seth Holler, Seth Kisner, um, Cooper McCauley, but guys like that. So, and then you got into powerlifting, and again, I just, kind of idolized you. You were the biggest, strongest guy on the team. So you got into it, and I was like, wow, that's, it seems fun. And I also like the idea that the only talent you need to begin doing it is access to equipment, or not. You need access to equipment, but then talent wise, you just need to be a hard worker, which isn't even a talent. You just need to be willing.
Yeah.
You just have to be willing, basically, to do what you got to do. So, yeah, that was how I got into
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and I always remember, and uh, from my perspective, if I remember correctly, like you mentioned Seth Holler, myself, whenever we were in eighth grade, we were like the two who were coming up from the eighth grade class. And then as we moved through high school, I remember you were pretty much the only one who was really consistent coming at such an early age. Isn't that right? It was maybe you and a couple other people, if any.
Yeah, there were a couple. So Corey Horner was coming with us for a while
Hmm.
until he quit playing football. Um, who else was big? I'm trying to think of who came in eighth grade. Maybe Brian Kelly. But yeah, the interest remained low, just as you said with your experience. And I know in my time at Southern, I didn't really see that uptick. I understand there was afterwards, but unfortunately, I did not remain involved with the sports program after graduation.
Yeah,
But it was low.
yeah. And I like to think, and I'm curious what you think about this because everyone I talk to, especially who decides to compete or is in the gym fairly regularly, kind of has this feeling. They're like, hey, I wish I started earlier. And for me, I still have that feeling starting like in seventh grade. I'm like, oh, could I have started earlier? But
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure at the age that you and I started, like starting earlier wouldn't have that much of a benefit. So I'm curious if you still have that like voice in your head that's like, did you start at the right time? How do you feel about your start?
So I feel good about it. I started right around that 16-year-old age, I would say. And I thought that was too late then, as you said, but now that I'm older and mainly see, I have a younger brother. He is 15. We're 10 years apart, and he started powerlifting when he was 13 or just had turned 14 maybe. Um, and got really into it. And he's very talented. He's very strong, but it has caused him a lot of grief because I think one of the main things that we might have had that maybe not fully, but we had developed more than himself is the maturity to deal with things, deal with bad training sessions, deal with training plateaus, to deal with adversity in training because he really like takes a mental beating and puts a mental beating on himself. And I really try to pick him up. But he's a great example of he is his own worst critic. And a lot of that I think is maybe
Mm,
because that maturity hasn't developed to a degree that may be needed to because nobody comes down hard on him other than himself. But it really puts a strain on him some days and leads to some very poor sessions. So I think I
that
started at a good time.
yeah, that's an interesting point that I hadn't thought of before. Like when I was starting,
Yeah.
and like you can probably relate to this. It was just you go in and there were some sets and reps on the board, and you just kind of threw on some weight, and like the
Hmm.
best term I have for it is broed it out. And
Hmm.
if you failed, then you're like, oh, whatever. Like I'll get it
Yeah.
next time. And
well,
there was a culture of like if you didn't fail, you weren't trying hard enough too.
hmm absolutely. I agree with that. And like a funny story that I know I've told my fiance and I've probably told lots of people is I remember when you were first exploring the, powerlifting and starting to get us guys into it. I remember Seth was, getting into it. We were doing like, I remember a couple of times we were doing, and you may remember this too, sets of like 20 squats, back squats to like end workout sessions. I
Mhm.
remember doing some leg days, and for a while there, we were hitting that one set of 20 at the end. And then I remember one day
Yes.
we were bench pressing and you like had been doing your research because that you've always been that type of way. You do your research, you're a smart guy. And you had come to us and talked about how you found research on like suboptimal effort, like maybe we should lift less than our max, like, quickly, and it was like, whoa, like, so definitely the culture of do or die was present, until that point.
Yeah, whether that's right or wrong, like because
Yeah.
now if I watch someone who maxes out every time, I'm like, ah, please stop. But
Yeah,
always recenter with, oh, that was me, you know.
it was. And that's one of the great things about powerlifting. Like on the days you are struggling with training plateaus or an injury or whatever, misfortune may have come your way, to think back to like, okay, at least today, even on my worst days, I at least understand training principles at this point, or like so just that progression in and of itself is something to hang your hat on, to be like, I was doing some pretty dangerous stuff at one point. That's why we don't judge anybody for being at that point. But definitely
Yeah.
it's good to work past it and then look back.
Yeah, and Stan and I, Stan Brown, who was on the last episode here, we were talking about something similar, like seeing someone in the gym who's maybe doing something that isn't the smartest thing, or, it doesn't look like they're trying that hard, and like the perspective that you get as a power lifter, just as someone in the gym who over time you learn not to like judge them so hard in your
Yeah.
mind. And it kind of goes with actually today in class, I had a student who had mentioned like he went into the gym and he had never bench pressed before. Like he was a track runner, he's going into college,
Mhm.
and he felt pressured. He just like slapped on
Oh, you
95
just,
pounds to try and bench it.
oh no.
Yeah, and he was like on the way down, just
Did it,
something in my shoulder like popped. Which he's fine. Like
oh,
there was no major
okay, good,
injury,
good.
but he like failed it and felt like he maybe tweaked something. And I was trying to get across to him like just start with the bar and like inch
Yeah.
up in weight, like slowly progress. There's no shame in doing the bar, but it's interesting to see how someone very inexperienced or like in a high school weight room, it's still the same mentality. It's like you better have some weight on the bar or
Yeah.
else I don't even know what.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I had somebody, I can't remember the guy's name, but I had a kid at Frostburg. He was a lacrosse player, very athletic guy. I mean, he was a short guy, but built well, lifted weights a lot. And he came up to me and knew I liked the powerlifting. He was like, what's your back squat? And I told him what my best in competition was. And he said, oh, well, that sucks. It's higher than mine. And I was like, oh, Evan, that was his name. I was like, Evan, you weigh 140 pounds. I was like, like you don't have to, your back squat's very good proportionally. It's much better than mine. Um, but yeah, people, there is that stigma. I guess it's that masculinity, but eventually you grow past that to where you're like, I'm coming in here to accomplish a task, that is laid out in my program. And what is happening around me is noise. Not that you can't enjoy some of it, but I think that's part of not judging people also, is it's just noise, like I don't want anybody to get hurt or anything, but I'm not even cognizant enough of you usually to judge you during my training sessions. Um, so, it's one of those things you'll get past it with time, hopefully, most lifters, but I can relate.
Yeah, yeah. And to go with that, the last thing I'll say on it is one of something I hear over and over in the gym, and it cracks me up. I love my gym, by the way. Shout out to Iron Forge in
Mhm.
Uniontown, Pennsylvania. You know, um, great atmosphere. Everyone in there is very supportive. But I'll just hear someone say like, "Oh man, you're the strongest person in this gym," or like
Mhm.
something along the lines. And in my mind as a power lifter, I'm like, well, the goal is not to be the strongest in the gym. My
Yeah,
goal is to
yeah,
be the strongest, like in the United States or beyond, or something like that. So like adding to that noise, being the strongest in the gym might be something that younger me would think about a whole lot more than current me for sure.
yeah, absolutely. That's that young man, I guess, when you're just running hot. That's my brother. I mean, he's young and all the time he's like, oh, that kid was squatting X or Y. How old do you think he is? Do you think he's older than me? And I'm like, does it matter? Like, does he compete at 114 in the USPA, and is he showing up on whatever date,
Right.
um, so no, you're not, nobody's getting a medal for this one. So let it go.
Right. And that perfect segue into so you got out of high school. I know we would see each other pretty regularly in Wildwood for a period of time when I was like off for Frostburger between um, classes and whatnot. At what point did you do your first competition? I was trying to remember what year that
Oh my
was.
gosh. The first time I competed was just a local competition in Cumberland, or might have been Fort Ashby. I can't remember, but it was just a push pull meet, and I don't even think it was sanctioned through anybody. But that one would have been 2017, and then I didn't
Okay.
even compete again until 20 end of 2019. So it was a long period in between. There was a meet, the one you may be thinking of. There was a meet in 2016 and somewhere around Baltimore that was USAPL that I was going to do, and then just wimped out. I mean, basically at the time, just wimped out. I had a small knee injury, not even an injury. I mean, a small knee tweak,
Hmm.
and at the time, I was just like, oh, well, if I'm not going to do this or that, I'm not going. And that's one of my biggest regrets was, so back to starting too late. One of my biggest regrets is just all the competitions I either didn't sign up for, or like that one where I ended up pulling out of it because I was like, man, all those ones were just lack of confidence at the time when I just wasn't to that certain
Hmm.
maturity level to realize it doesn't matter. Like this is an individual sport. Like you're doing it for you. Um, but yeah, but then I competed 1920 and then 22. So just like a year ago today or a couple days ago, I competed in my last one.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
I saw your post on Facebook. It was like the memory of your squad,
Yeah.
I think. Um,
Yep.
yeah, so at this point you've done four, but granted you've been seriously powerlifting training for uh what is that, 7 years? And that's just since you graduated high school, right?
Yeah. Those are the only years I would count even. In high school when I first got into powerlifting, I just, obviously I was taking inspiration from you, but not following any guidance in terms of just following a program, which you were doing that, but I would like just hop around. I'd be like, oh, this one's too easy, or oh, this one's way too hard, and then and then you end up going
Yeah.
nowhere. But yeah,
And I mean, I still even only count my powerlifting years too. Like I separate um I did my first meet the end of my high school senior year, but really that's like my starting point to serious training, I felt like, even though like you said, we were trying to figure out programs and the probably year before that, I would say probably getting decent training, but as a high schooler, you're just like trying to figure this weight room thing out.
yeah, yeah, basically. But yeah, I think so. The next one we're probably going to do is September 9th. My brother and myself are probably going to do a USPA meet. It was I can't remember where the heck it was at, which I know sounds terrible, but basically if I find one and I'm like that location works, I just put the date,
Yeah.
into my and I just it's that I don't know, I'm bad about that. I end up procrastinating and not, renewing my membership until the last minute but
Uh-huh.
we're going to compete and then hopefully try to qualify for nationals and do that probably sometime. The meet would be in September. Nationals for USPA are usually hosted like June, July, so it would be
Okay.
quite a lengthy, training period leading up to that.
Yeah. And I'm trying to remember. So Cody Shreve,
Hmm.
I talk to him fairly regularly. I know he's looking to make that jump from like local meets to like national and higher level meets as well. Is that something that like you two have talked about to do together, or is that just coincidence that both you guys are looking to move up at the same time?
No, it absolutely it was talked about. So we realized that we're strong enough, right? I mean, we're strong enough to qualify, so it's like, well, you're strong enough to go compete, so you should do it, because it's experience. Whether you take your licks or you come out better than you thought, it's a story to tell, and it's a different atmosphere, because local meets, move at a different pace, and it's a different kind of environment in the warm up room and things like that. So it's a challenge to be had, an experience to be had. And also, like Cody, he has a good chance at doing very well. And same thing with my brother. Myself, it's a little bit more of a long shot, but again, I'm up to the challenge because for me, I always perform better with some kind of goal, especially if I'm already signed up, committed to it. Which kind of
Yeah.
sounds bad. You should be motivated enough to train without a goal, but definitely looking forward to trying to move up and achieve something better, really lights the fire.
Yeah, and well, I'll push back a little bit, and I'm almost like pushing back against the point you just made, but for
Yeah,
what you're doing, um, I will
yeah.
say like having met a bunch of people in the sport and like high level lifters, etc. There are some people who are extremely motivated by competing, and
Mm.
there's some people who are extremely motivated by training. Um, and both of those are totally okay. Like you're saying, a competition and having the goal of like getting to compete against people is what drives you, right?
Well, kind of more like if I know I have a competition coming up, like knowing I have that test or display of my strength drives me like to
Okay.
show up
Yeah.
essentially more. Yeah.
Yeah. Because
But
I'm kind of, I mean, I'm very similar in that once I have the set goal, I'm like, okay, this is what everything's being funneled towards. Whereas, like,
yeah,
there are
basically.
times where you're like kind of lost in limbo if you don't have a next thing.
Mhm. That's me. I just
And
find it hard to maybe push as hard because, like, obviously, when I'm in the off season, I'm not hitting, typically heavy doubles or things like that. So it's like, I don't know, it gets me back on track and start, working towards a peaking block and working towards, that peak of strength. And it's also very exciting, especially when I've been on like a long layoff or training just volume work for a long time. It's also, I guess that drives me also is the excitement of um just that the ramp up because it just is so crazy. Like when you go through, your first peak or a couple of them, and just feeling your body responding to training is also kind of exciting for me. Like as you're doing it, it's kind of surreal because you trust the process, like everybody says, and you don't. Maybe you have questions at first, but then it works. Like it, if you do your homework and work hard. So that's exciting.
yeah, yeah. And I will say you've always seemed very cerebral about your training. Like you're cognizant about being on a program and trusting the process, like you said. So hopefully that's something like viewers can take away, being patient. Because I'm trying to think, you said you had some knee issues. Have you dealt with like injuries along the way, or have those been kind of tamed?
Yeah, so I've been pretty fortunate. I had one significant injury, which was when I had an umbilical hernia
I
during
remember that.
senior year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was bad. And that one had a lengthy mental recovery because it was always kind of one of those back of your mind things like, oh, because I did my research, I like to read and stuff, so I'm like, oh, the reoccurrence rate is, well, whatever. So you're always kind of nervous. So I kind of held myself back for a long time in terms of really getting after it. And I think during but I've been pretty fortunate in that regard. Other than that, I had one bad back injury, or not even too bad. I hurt my spinal erector, one of them, pretty good, and that made it pretty tough to get around for a while. But other than that, I've been pretty fortunate.
Yeah. Yeah. And was that umbilical hernia from lifting? Or was it from
Uh,
something else and then you couldn't lift because of it? Do you remember?
it was kind of undetermined because it wasn't protruding at all, like typical of one sustained during lifting. So the doctor's best guess was that it may have been an artifact of not having one as a child, because I never had, most children will have an umbilical hernia very young and it'll
Mm.
heal up and it's not a problem. But I never had one. So they think possibly that weak spot never did tear and then heal like is typical of babies. So it was just kind of a weak area and it may have happened from coughing or who knows what. So hard to say.
Yeah, yeah, and I think like that kind of speaks volumes just hearing your injury history of the calculated approach. Even though, and I talk about this sometimes when I'm trying to either usually it's convince someone to stay on a program or convince
Mm,
someone to um like push themselves more because usually it's like one end or the other. I don't know why. Like
mm.
people are either crazy aggressive or they're crazy conservative in the gym, and it's like about finding that middle ground. And I think someone like you or I is we're good testaments to pushing enough but trusting programs because if you just go in and you max out every time you hop in the gym or you go till failure
Yeah.
constantly, like those injuries are gonna stack up. And then before you know it, you're gonna be stuck out of the sport because you're just beat.
Yeah, I agree. And a big one with like the program jumping that, we've talked about a couple times is that when I was program jumping a lot, and this stuff has even, happened recently to me in the off season, you'll find yourself taking a look at lots of different things, and then you're like, whoa, stop. Um, when you program hop all the time, a lot of people I find myself doing or other people, they won't deload forever because you're doing the
Mm.
first, almost the first block or close to the first block of every program in the world. And it's always, well, I'll wait till Monday and I'll jump into the next one, or I'll wait till, I'll jump into the next one. And you never deload. And that's just crazy because that is so important to, be strategic with your waves and your blocks to make sure that you do rest up.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That if you're familiar, which I'm sure you are, with Mike Tuchir of
Hmm?
RTS, he likes to use the term pivot or like a pivot block, where it's a couple weeks to just get like reacclimated to something new before you just jump into it. And I like that terminology, even though like I think in old bro speak, what he's saying is deload, right? But he's
Yeah,
using the word
yeah.
pivot,
Mm,
which I like that word because it kind of implies, hey, you're going in this direction. You need to like take a couple weeks to turn to the next direction rather than like take a step back or something like that. But you're
mm.
100% right. Um, that's one of the detriments from like hopping programs so much.
Yeah, I agree. And um, yeah, it's just important to deload, and it's also just important to take care of yourself. And like you said, it doesn't deload isn't synonymous with take a step back or take it easy or lift light. A lot of times you're talking, you're knocking a couple percentages off of it, in terms of weight, but it's usually still pretty hefty. It's just that you're reducing volume or you're reducing number of sets oftentimes for me. And that makes a huge difference for me. And I've used the Juggernaut AI system a good bit in my
Mhm.
training in the past, and they do bridge blocks, which are similar to these pivot blocks, where you'll have kind of an introductory block going in, and yeah, it's great. And a lot of times you think, oh, I only have two sets of whatever for, let's say, competition bench press, and you're like, well, maybe I should just do a couple more. I usually do three working sets or four working sets, but no, like the work will come. It's usually an accumulation over the course of your training cycle. So if you are really in there training hard and the frequencies where it needs to be, it's going to rack up over time.
Yeah, I always think to myself like, when I'm tempted, because I've been fortunate to where I talked about the like way too conservative and the way too aggressive lifter. I'm
Mhm.
closer to the too conservative lifter. So I never have these thoughts of like hopping off my program, which, I've been fortunate to where I've been with the same coach for 7 years at this point. And like, I just know what he puts on the paper, that's what I'm going to do. But
Nope.
the closest thing that I come to like going off program is uh, I use mostly percentage based training with him. And sometimes the number will be between two intervals. So like it'll be
Yeah.
like 617. And that little demon on my shoulder is like, that's close enough to round to 620. But every time I listen to that demon, what happens is because it progresses the next week, you have like that pressure to keep rounding up. And like
Mm,
you said, that fatigue builds on itself where it's like, why not just, you know, take it down to 615 or whatever the number is and
mm.
like just hit it faster, you know? And
Yeah.
that's going to roll more confidence into the next week.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Um, and like you said, it's almost like counterintuitive because so if you look back on week one of the block, you're like, I'm splitting hairs over 615 versus 620, but you're like, okay, at the end of the block, week, whatever it is for your style of training, okay, well, I'm going to be hitting the single with 650 or whatever. It's like, well, maybe I should just
Right.
do 615 in due time. I am headed that direction, and beyond.
Yeah.
So let it come.
Yeah, and I think that's like to give another kind of example, I've this one's been sitting with me where uh I recently was getting into my training for North Americans, which is in August. So I have 12 weeks and I had like a pretty bad leg infection to where I was out of the gym for a couple weeks and um I have snatch grip RDLs that I do on day one of my program. Well, the first week, I think it was a 4x10 at either 365 or 385, and I posted it up on YouTube or wherever, and someone commented and was like, "You may as well like not have done anything. It was too easy." Was kind of their point,
Yeah,
but that's that short term mindset because sure, I could have like thrown on 50 more pounds and done like 415 for 10 or something like that. But what does that do to my fatigue? That like where do I go from there? I'm 16 weeks out. I can
exact.
only progress for so much longer. And and instead of that, I started light, which they were right. Like they were easy sets. But
Mhm.
at this point, 5 weeks later, we're up to like 520 for eights. So we've progressed
Mhm.
farther than had we just like jumped into some number. And people, I think that comes with like social media. I don't know. It's the short term, like I want it now mindset.
Yeah, and like 2 points on that is one, like you said, you're going beyond what you could have done that week. So this person who is giving you grief would probably have granted their, good graces to a four, like you said, 415, 435. They'd been like, oh, okay, that's pretty good. But now you're up to 520. So it's
Right.
like, give me my time. Like I will do something that pleases you. Not that it even matters, you know that, but and
Right.
then also with the instant gratification, this is just the wrong sport. Like I thought this was the right sport for all kinds of instant gratification at first,
Uh-huh.
but fast forward 7 years, like we talk about, and I've only ever even gotten out there 4 times. I've achieved not as much as I thought I would, but it was all worth it. I love it, and I'm going to keep doing it. But it is not instant gratification. It is, hard work and knowing that you're headed somewhere where you want to be.
Yeah, and I mean, you you got to give yourself more credit. You've been training for we'll call it 7 years at this point, and
Yeah.
4 competitions is much more than 99% of people were ever going to do. But um, like you said, the great thing about the sport is you're like what you have yet to accomplish, all of those high goals that you said, like you thought you would be somewhere else right now. Maybe it's just a little bit later down the road. Like we could do this into our 40s at a very high level,
Mm.
which to me is exciting. You got 20 years of good
Yeah.
lifting left.
Incredibly exciting. And that's also, again, a testament, just because everything ties back together all the time. That's a testament to the intelligent training, managing fatigue, managing load, um, because you want to do this into your 40s because we love this sport. If you're really in it for the passion of it, the love of it, aside from any accolades or anything, you should be excited, like you said, that you can do this at a high level into your 40s, and you can do it, into your 60s, 70s, and beyond, to some degree.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know. I mean, I I don't know how you feel, but I see myself just lifting weights until I probably die or I'm crippled, one of the two. But like that doesn't mean I'm going to be competing that
Hmm.
long, but I'll certainly try because, if you back to the delayed gratification point, if you don't enjoy training, like you might be driven by competitions and goals, but
Hmm.
for the amount of time that you have to put in for one competition that's every so often, like there are better sports to, you know, get that gratification.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And also, you hear, so we both are sports guys. We love all sports. So I watch a lot of 30 for 30 or different things. And you hear about these guys that, like, oh, yeah, after practice, he is, going to the club or doing drugs or participating in this or that. And it's like, in our sport, the amount of things you give up for a meet prep, because it's all down to this one day. Like I don't get 16 Sundays in a row, or I guess 18 now or whatever, to redeem myself if I don't perform well because I did whatever, stupid thing. I get one day and I've put everything into it. So I'm going to miss things. I'm going to sacrifice social things. And that's my choice. It's not dictated. I could do whatever and delay sessions and move them around, but I'm not going to do that. So you got to love it. Otherwise, I wouldn't do that. It would be totally, nonsensical to, sacrifice that much for something if you don't really care.
Yeah, yeah, and have you had a bad meet or like a meet you've been disappointed in at this point?
Yeah, I would say not the whole meet though. So the last meet I did, the one that you saw the memory of, I was happy with my deadlift. So I achieved a little more than I thought I would on the deadlift and on the bench press for that matter, but I was just really displeased with my squats because I had lifted so much better in training than anything I did on the platform. And I'm not going to make excuses because it was just a poor performance, and there's probably lots of factors, right? But the one thing that sticks out in
Hmm.
my mind is I just was so mad at myself. I didn't practice on carpet because it's right in the rule book that they use carpet on the platform, and it was very plushy, and I just did not practice, and I just could not establish what I felt like was a balanced foot position. Um, and I just kept like coming up on my toes and it felt very awkward. So I ended up with like a 479 point whatever squat. And but in training I had squatted 475 for a triple. So I was like,
Yeah,
I just tons left on the platform. So that was the main one I was disgusted with because it wasn't a good representation of how prep went.
yeah, and that's a good point to go with the nature of the sport. There's so many little things whenever you're like approaching max effort lifts and lifts on the platform. something as little as foot position or the texture of the ground or the whip of the bar can cost you kilos. And then uh, I would be willing to bet, I mean, depending on like how many squats you made or whatever, but people watching probably thought like, oh, you did a great job, or your family who was there or whoever was there, like they don't know any better. But in your head, you're like, training went better. Like it should have set me up better than
Yeah.
479 or whatever was on the bar. Yeah, and I've been there. I honestly, and what's hilarious, this past nationals, uh, it's my favorite meet. Like to win a national championship at the open level is like, I'll never forget that. But
Oh yeah.
the power lifter
Great.
inside is like, I didn't perform my best on any of the three lifts. Like I knew I was capable of more. So
Right.
um, I was like, in my head, it's not one of my best meets as far as like performances go. So it's funny that's the perception of the crowd or people looking in versus someone in the head of the lifter, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, it's just crazy to think that like there's a difference between, like you said, what is the meat you hang your hat on for like career wise, and what is your best performance. Like those do not have to be synonymous or be the same meat at all. And your favorite meet doesn't have to be the one where you got your first national championship. It may be for it's up to you. It's personal. Um,
Right.
but there's so many things at play. Like I loved the last meet I did just because of the people who put it on. It was a very good, well ran meet, so even though I was displeased with my squats, I was overall liked that meet better than the previous ones I had done. Um, even though I wasn't super happy with the performance. So powerlifting's unique in that respect. Every football player would probably cite the Super Bowl as, probably their best and best performance, but powerlifting, it can be different.
That's true. Yeah. And uh, like you had mentioned, the powerlifting's unique at least because you have three lifts. You said you kind of made it up with your deadlift and your bench having a pretty good day. You probably can look back, or at least in time, because time heals all wounds a little bit, or at least that's how I feel with some of my poorer performances. Um, but like looking back, you're like, okay, that was a decent day deadlifting, even though squat might not have been what I wanted it to be.
Yeah, and I'm quick to forget about it, which is one of my strengths, and I think it's something people should try to develop if you don't do good with this. But after I was, mad with squats, or not really mad, but displeased, immediately I was like, well, I got a bench. So that kind of all goes out the window because you can't undo it. So moved on to bench and deadlift, and everything was good. So even right after the meet, I'm already over it. And obviously the stakes aren't quite as high as like a national championship or something. Um, that would be much more momentous to win. But I'm quick to let go of it. I'm like, you got to move on. Even if I had performed to the best of my potential, I would have still got second. I know my placing wouldn't have changed either way.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
so yeah, wasn't nothing to really be mad about. You just got to execute better. So I was a little upset with myself, but I'm not going to stew on it. You just got to do better. There's no sugarcoating it. Just do better.
Yeah. I can't remember. You didn't play baseball in high school, did you?
No, I played football as a funny mix of sports. I played football, wrestled, and then was on the bowling team.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, because I I think I knew you were in either bowling, golf, or baseball, but I couldn't
Yeah.
place which one of those three. That makes sense. And I think bowling probably has a similar thing. I always think to myself, like, and I have this bad habit. I need to crush the habit, but I miss third benches all the time. Like I don't miss squats that actually I don't miss squats at all, really, unless I get called on depth. And then I'll miss a deadlift occasionally if I'm pulling for a win or whatever, and I just can't. But bench, for whatever reason, I like constantly miss benches. And in my head, I always think back to baseball because, and I just call it the like baseball mentality. But in baseball, you're going to get out 7 out of the 10 times you go to bat, and
Yeah.
that's if you're successful. And I think of it like striking out in baseball because you can't let those hang on you. And
Mhm.
missing a lift in powerlifting is very similar. Like you just gotta push that out. And I imagine it's similar in something like bowling, where if you have a bad throw, you can't just let that influence the next throw that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Anything, and in powerlifting, it's harder, right? Because you don't get as many plate appearances or chances to roll the ball because you only get 9 attempts. But that's why it's even more important to have that mentality that maybe you develop with a different sport like
Mhm.
baseball or bowling. Um, which maybe that's something that was useful to us that we didn't realize until now. But you're absolutely right. In bowling, um, you have 10 frames. So if you mess one up, your best course of action is to stop messing them up. So you got to clear your mind of mistakes, and move forward. Same thing with powerlifting. If you had a poor squat performance, like I tell my brother, the best thing you can do right now is calm down and gather yourself to give yourself the
Mhm.
best, statistical chance to do well in the rest of this meet. Because it's honestly, it boils down to trying to be cerebral about it. You have to take a step back and say, my best fighting chance is to not freak out, not stew on this.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I like to think that some of that mental toughness really separates like the decent powerlifters from the good to the very good, and that's just a practice thing too. So it's cool to see that you think the same way as far as like, all right, clean slate. And I like the way you put it, just stop doing things wrong.
Yeah, like I mean, there's no powerlifting's usually a pretty straightforward sport. So like if you're messing up, you just need to stop messing up. And it's probably because you're getting worked up or you get, like one lift, you could get caught on depth on your opener on squat. That's one of the worst case scenarios, something like that. And you missing a command's not so bad, but like if you miss depth, then you immediately like, oh, do I stay here? Do I go up? I can't go back down. Like, um,
Hmm.
and you have 1 minute to sort all this out. So, it,
It's true.
very,
Yeah.
like it's a huge crisis internally, and you have 60 seconds. So definitely it becomes paramount to be able to like just pick yourself up and figure out where you have to go from here.
Yeah. Now, are you someone who, so like me, I've gone through this evolution as a lifter. Like if you watch me early in my lifting career, I was so internal. I'd just
Mhm.
walk up, no emotion, lift it. I could be so excited, but you would not know. And I would just
Right.
walk off. And as I've competed, it's like kind of evolved to this spectacle, I guess I call it, where really it's quite embarrassing if I think about it from the outside, but I'm pacing and like crying and talking to myself and all kinds of weird stuff um, to get like this next level of excitement. But I would say that was always in me,
Mhm.
but I tamed it early because I felt like whenever you're still getting used to competing and all the power lifts, like if you get yourself too emotional, you're just going to screw something up. Like you were just saying, like it's a simple sport, but one thing off can throw off the whole lift. And as I've gotten better, I can juggle it more. I just like turn on autopilot for the completing the lift portion, and I let the emotions take me away. How
Hmm.
do you approach emotions on like in both the gym and on the platform? Do you just let them run wild, or do you kind of keep them in check?
So I think, um, as far as the emotional thing goes, it's kind of like a multifaceted thing to look at. So one, I think we all kind of tame it early because before you master your sport, you don't want to screw up like you talked about. And also you don't want to look like the guy who's being that guy. Like he's not there yet, he's strength wise. And nobody's usually thinking this, but you think they're thinking this. So you don't want
Mhm.
people to be like, wow, he's really putting on a show and he hasn't achieved much or he's not very strong. And um, so that might be why a lot of us tame it early because you don't want to do what you really want to do or what feels good. But then as I've progressed, I agree. The same exact thing happened. It's more of a spectacle now sometimes, both in competition and the gym occasionally. And a lot of that's just because I'm more comfortable now as a lifter, and I've realized this is the only time I get in this whole competition or whatever. So I might as well do what feels good or is fun. So definitely in competition, I say let them run wild, like whatever's natural. I wouldn't force things, personally to make it more showmanshipy,
Mhm.
but but I do the same thing at pace. I talk to myself because it's really how I'm feeling. Like that's the level of aggression I'm at. Um, but in training, I like to limit it more because it's like you said with maxing. I don't want to just the energy and mental expenditure. I try to think of my mental reserve as a resource as well, and I try not to tap into it too much. But again, you can't be too conservative, like you said. So it's a fine line.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I very, close to competition, I'll start to pull that out. And we're probably getting it from the same resource, I would guess. I remember Dave Tate would always talk about like I think he called it going into the void or something along those lines. And he would always say like you can only tap into it so many times. So it's like that reserve ace card in your back pocket that you're like, okay, this is going to be a big lift. Let's pull out the ace card. So yeah, I approach it exactly the same, I think.
It's like I don't know. It's like Yu-Gi-Oh or something. If you pulled the blue-eyed dragon card every time, like it wouldn't work anymore. So
Right.
that
Yeah.
and definitely it's the whole thing. And it all ties back to fatigue, everything being cerebral. Like you don't want to hang yourself out to dry, spread yourself too thin because you're still a human ultimately. There's only so much we can do, even if we're trying to be superhuman. So you have to pick your battles, so to speak. Be smart, but train hard. Don't limit yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and so those are all kind of good points about how training's evolved over time. Would you, what are your goals kind of with the sport? I'm curious, like, do you plan to lift until you're old and in the nursing home, or do you have like kind of an end game here?
No, I'm right there with you. I want to lift until I'm old because now that I um am finally, just working, I have a career, right now. I might move into teaching, but I have a career, I'm making money. um, and school's out of the way. So I'm ready to start lifting all the time. So I just want to really start competing more regularly to keep my training great. Um, and then uh, long-term goals, I guess, would be to big one on my radar is I got to get that 1,500 pound total. That one's been weighing
Mhm.
on me. So that's the next big thing on my list. I don't care, what medal that wins me at whatever respective meet, but that's my big thing is to do that. And with that, I want to do get the 250 kilo squat. That would be huge in the same meet, hopefully. So
Yeah, that's a big
That's the
squat.
Yeah, it's the big things I'm training for, and hopefully I'll do it at 90 kilos. I'm still between 90 and 100, but I'm not cutting any at 100, and I might be cutting a good bit at 90. So we'll see.
Yeah. Is there because you mentioned you've competed USPA for all four of your meets?
Well, no, the small one in West Virginia or Cumberland, I can't remember which side of the border it was on. That one was
Yeah.
unsanctioned. Then the three were USPA, but no USAPL
Gotcha.
or. But this next one, I guess, would be WRPF. I actually forgot that the Papa Bear Rogers, the meets he hosts in Maryland. I had forgotten they had all been absorbed by the WRPF during the whole USPA scandal
Like
debacle last year.
drama.
Yeah,
Right.
and then they split off.
Why can't
Yeah.
federations just get their act together?
I don't know. I've thought about USAPL. I did purchase a very nice power bar from Bells of Steel, which first of all they have great power bars if you ever need one for your home gym though. But
Oh,
did
really?
get one
Nice.
so in case I got to keep it in my back pocket. So USAPL, I've thought about it. I got the bar just in case, but we'll we'll see.
Yeah, yeah. I was just gonna ask you, like, what led to that decision as far as federation goes? Is it mostly just accessibility of meats?
Yeah, that's what started it for me was um USPA had meets in Morgantown. So that was basically what got me. Like when I was looking to do that first sanctioned meet, I was looking at all federations and kind of weighing my options in terms of not only distance but also fees because I was, very broke at the time, broke college student, and like yourself, we were pretty much on our own most of the time when we were in college doing whatever thing. So I'm weighing the money options also. And USPA ended up being a little bit cheaper and in Morgantown, so I decided to do that because I think the closest USAPL at a similar time frame was going to be Columbia, Maryland, down closer to the
Hmm.
Baltimore area. So I was also
Yeah,
nervous about driving in Baltimore. I knew I'd be going solo wherever I was headed, so I was like, I don't know,
yeah.
I'm from Garrett County. I don't know if I'll make it.
Yeah, that was actually the location of my first meet was Columbia, Maryland, which um I think they held a lot of meets in that area. I don't think it was CrossFit Diesel was the gym that always ran meets from there. But yeah, I can definitely relate to the proximity thing. I feel like we were very limited for a long time as far as meets go.
I feel like a lot of that, like when you ended up doing your first meet with the USAPL, when you did that, I feel like there was like nothing other than USAPL meets because the USPA wasn't even established until 2018 or something. It's relatively
Oh,
recent.
really?
Oh, it's super recent in terms of the age of
Know
the
that.
federation, and then um, so I think you probably would have been even more limited, because I at least have the options of there's probably three or four you could hit right now. But the funny thing is, a lot of federations you'll see like sprouted up around the coronavirus pandemic because of certain federations not offering meets at the time.
Yeah, it's like a
So,
supply demand thing.
yeah.
Demand was probably up, and other federations have to swoop in to fill that void a little bit.
Mhm. Made the I like
Um,
to refer to it as like the record grab that occurred because of that. Everybody like I have records. Yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, I still have
yeah.
students sometimes ask me like, "Oh, do you have any records or what records do you have?" And something that was so important to me at my first powerlifting meet has literally so little significance to me now. Like, it's just
Yep.
interesting that maturing process of yeah, state records.
Yep, state
But
records.
at the same time, I don't want thinking back. I don't want to make it seem like they're not that significant. They're significant goals to go for. You're
Yes.
100%. Like, you know, I don't want people who have state records to feel like I'm saying it's not significant. What I am saying is, um, there are so many federations and everything. Sometimes I think they get lost or at least diluted down a little bit as far as like what you're conveying.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot of I don't know. That's why I take a lot more pride in personal records a lot of times in terms of like, well, what is my best? And oftentimes it's sets. I love PR sets, like squatting the 475 for a triple. That's like all time, probably my favorite set. I
Yeah.
love the squat, so to me, that's a lot more important than because I set some state records at my first USPA meet and they were awful. Um, but they're just they were even it was a new federation. There were even worse records that I beat, and I was very very proud of them. And now I'm like, I don't even feel super good about like that being printed at some point.
Yeah, that's
So
exactly what I was getting at too. Yeah. I'm the same way with my first meet state records. Like, I'll probably still look back on them fondly, with kids
mhm.
someday or grandkids or whatever, and I'll be like, I used to be strong, but uh, at the same time, yes, right now, there's bigger things, and that might be a PR set in the gym or something like that.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, man, we're a little past the hour mark, so I'm not going to keep you too much later. I know we got a late start, but I really appreciate you hopping on here and just kind of talking shop a little bit. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or that came to mind before we hop off?
No, I don't think so. Just super good to see you, even if it's digital. I'm glad you've been doing well. Looks like you're doing well. And I wish you good luck in your upcoming nationals meet, man. I mean, we all know you're going to kill it because you always have. But I gotta say it so I can say that I say it.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah, and I mean, likewise, I appreciate you taking the time to hop on here, and I'll go ahead and end the recording, and we can, it won't boot you out or anything, so we can say a
Sweet.
farewell. But I will say farewell to the audience. Thanks for hanging around. If you're still
Yep.
around this far in, um, drop a like. Check out Matt's social media. Matt, what are your handles that people can find you at?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I think my Instagram handle is fine. Yeah. So on Instagram, it's the only one I really use. It's at that underscore dude 2016.
All right, that dude. Okay, yeah, go ahead and check Matt out. Follow him and his progress as he kind of continues his journey with his brother. I think I've seen you post your brother up there as well, so you can follow both of them. And thanks for watching. Drop a like, and until next time, happy lifting, everyone.